He was a monk who did not pray for heaven. He prayed for his body to remain on earth. Day by day, he stripped himself of life, starving, drinking poisonous teas, binding his flesh to bone until nothing human was left. Each breath was slower, each step weaker, and still he whispered prayers, not for salvation, but for preservation. This was no ordinary ritual. It was a process known only to the most secretive monasteries: self-mummification, a death by design, a sacrifice to turn a living body into a relic. The monk knew his fate. He would bury himself alive in a wooden chamber, locked in meditation. A small tube allowed air, a single bell at his side to signal prayers. When the bell fell silent, his brothers would seal the tomb forever. But here's the horror. Years later, when the chamber was opened, his body was not dust. It was seated upright, skin clinging to bone, mouth frozen in prayer. He had made himself into a saint of his own making, a relic of living death. And the question echoes still. Did he conquer mortality, or did he trap himself inside it forever? The monk's name has been lost to centuries, but the ritual he undertook was one of the most feared and revered in history. It was known in secret circles of Buddhist monasteries as Sokushinbutsu, the path of turning oneself into a living relic. Few attempted it. Fewer still succeeded. The process began years before death. The monk abandoned rice, wheat, and every grain that could feed the body with softness. Instead, he consumed bark, roots, pine needles. He drank resin from trees until his stomach convulsed. Slowly, he stripped every layer of fat from his frame so that worms and rot would find no sustenance when his time came. But starvation was only the beginning. To poison himself, he drank teas brewed from urushi, the sap of the lacquer tree, the same substance used to coat bowls and coffins. In small doses, it burned his insides, scarring his organs, blackening his blood. In larger doses, it preserved his flesh, making it too toxic for decay. Each day was a deliberate step toward death. Each night was a prayer whispered not to gods above, but to the bones beneath his skin. His brothers watched him grow skeletal, his skin tightening like paper over the skull. And still he smiled. Still he recited sutras. Still he claimed this suffering was not an end, but a beginning. When the time came, they dug a small chamber in the earth, barely wide enough for a man to sit cross-legged. Inside, they placed a narrow reed for air, a small bell for prayer. The monk entered willingly, carrying nothing but his robe and his faith. He sat in lotus posture, spine straight, hands folded. The lid was lowered. Darkness swallowed him whole. From above, the brothers listened each day for the faint sound of the bell. Each ring meant he still lived. Each chime was proof of endurance. For weeks the sound continued, weak, slowing but steady. Until one day, silence. No movement, no breath, no prayer. The reed was sealed. The chamber was closed. His brothers filled the earth above him, whispering chants of honor. They did not know if his sacrifice would succeed. For 3 years they waited. When at last they opened the tomb, they expected dust, a collapsed skeleton, fragments of bone. Instead, what they saw froze their voices. The monk sat upright, exactly as he had entered. His lips were drawn back in prayer. His flesh, though withered, had not rotted. His skin clung like parchment to his frame, hardened by poison, preserved by suffering. He had become a relic, not embalmed by others, but mummified by his own will. The monks wept. Some bowed, declaring him a Buddha in flesh. Others trembled, afraid. For here was a man who had crossed the boundary of life and death by his own hand and remained. A body that prayed beyond the grave. A skeleton that refused to fall. His remains were placed in the temple as a holy figure. Pilgrims came to kneel before him, believing his spirit still lingered within his preserved frame. Candles burned at his feet. Offerings were laid in silence. His sacrifice had turned him into what he desired most. Not dust, not ghost, but a saint of his own making. But beneath the reverence, fear lingered. His eyes were closed, but his presence was undeniable. His body was seated, but his aura filled the temple like a living man. Was this holiness or horror? Did he achieve eternal enlightenment, or had he imprisoned his soul forever in a body that refused to decay? The question whispered through generations. And even now, centuries later, his skeleton remains. Not a corpse, not fully gone, a body suspended between life and death, proof of devotion and of obsession taken beyond all mortal limits. The monk who succeeded in turning his body into a relic became a legend within his order. But his example inspired others, men who believed they too could reach eternity through torment. They followed the same path. They fasted, poisoned, withered, and most of them failed. For every monk who achieved preservation, dozens decayed. Their bodies rotted in the earth despite years of suffering. Their skeletons collapsed into ash, leaving nothing but the echo of their attempt. These failures were not celebrated. They were hidden, their tombs sealed in silence, their names erased from records. The path of bones was not merely holy, it was a gamble, a razor's edge between sainthood and oblivion. The monasteries built what came to be called gardens of waiting. Beneath the earth, chambers lined with wooden coffins held monks still alive, still praying, their bells ringing faintly through narrow reeds. Rows of tombs like silent clocks, each marking the slow death of a devotee. Some bells rang for days, others for weeks, but one by one each bell fell silent. When the chambers were opened years later, the truth was grim. Some monks had decomposed fully, their robes collapsing around blackened dust. Others half preserved, their faces sunken, eyes hollow, skin blistered from urushi poison, but still rotting away. The smell of death lingered in those tombs, a bitter reminder that suffering did not guarantee immortality. And yet a few, just a few, emerged as relics. Their bodies sat upright, preserved by their own hands, their skin hardened like lacquer, their posture eternal. These were declared living Buddhas, men who had conquered death not through divine intervention, but through discipline so brutal it blurred the line between devotion and self-destruction. But the failed ones haunted the survivors. Monks who tended the chambers spoke of hearing the bells in their dreams, bells that had long since stopped ringing. They described waking to the sound of scratching beneath the earth, as if the failed monks still clawed at their coffins, begging release. Some said the urushi poison bound their souls to their bodies even in failure, trapping them in decay, unable to ascend or vanish. Local villagers avoided the temple grounds. They feared that the earth itself was saturated with death. They whispered that on certain nights, the monks' preserved faces seemed to shift, lips twitching, eyes trembling beneath paper-thin lids. Pilgrims bowed in awe before the relics, but others shivered, wondering if the preserved saints were truly at peace, or if they sat imprisoned in an endless meditation, screaming behind their silence. The practice spread across centuries. From the 11th to the 19th century, monks across northern Japan attempted soku shimbutsu. Records show perhaps 24 succeeded. Hundreds more died in vain. Each temple displayed its relic proudly, as proof of devotion, but behind every relic was a graveyard of failures, men who had given their lives to become eternal and were instead forgotten. This contrast carved a deeper fear into the ritual. It was not merely about holiness, it was about control. The monk who succeeded became a symbol of willpower greater than nature, but the monk who failed was a warning. Devotion could lead not to enlightenment, but to a half-life of rot and torment. Even today, in hidden corners of those temples, glass cases hold the preserved monks, their robes faded, their faces withered, their hands folded in prayer that has lasted centuries. Visitors kneel before them, whispering prayers of their own. But some swear the air grows heavy near the cases. Some swear the eyes of the skeletons shift in the glass. And some whisper that if you stare too long, you will hear the faint sound of a bell from beneath the earth. The path of bones was meant to create saints, but in its shadow it also created prisons, living tombs where men sought eternity and found only silence. The monks who succeeded in becoming relics were not simply preserved corpses. They were objects of terror and reverence, seated reminders that death itself could be resisted, not by miracle, but by suffering. To stand before them was to stand before the boundary between life and death, and to see a man who had chosen to straddle it forever. Villagers brought offerings, but they did so trembling. Children were told never to meet the eyes of the relics. Some said the monks' faces were serene, frozen in meditation. Others swore their lips had curled into faint, unsettling smiles. A few pilgrims claimed that if you stood long enough in the temple chamber, the relics breathed. Not a full breath, just the faintest rise and fall of the chest, as if the body was unwilling to accept it had been left behind. The monks of those temples bore the burden of guarding these relics. They kept the chambers dark, lit only by thin candles. They dusted the cases, changed the robes draped across withered bodies, and whispered prayers to keep the spirits at rest. But their diaries reveal unease. One monk wrote that each night, when he approached the relic, he heard the faint sound of a bell ringing from deep within the earth. Another swore that the case fogged from the inside, as if warm breath pressed against the glass. The urushi poison was meant to preserve, but it was also said to trap. Locals whispered that the souls of the self-mummified monks had not ascended, but lingered, bound to their bodies like insects caught in amber. They had intended to transcend to become saints. Instead, they became guardians, or prisoners, watching the world through hollowed sockets. In one village, a preserved monk was displayed in a temple chamber for centuries. Pilgrims swore that in times of famine, the monk's withered hand changed position, once resting on his lap, then days later lifted slightly, as though offering. When questioned, the monks of the temple denied it, but records show offerings increased dramatically in those years, as if the villagers believed the relic himself had demanded them. The darkest accounts came not from pilgrims, but from those who tried to disturb the relics. In 1822, thieves broke into a temple to steal gold ornaments from the case of a preserved monk. When they pried open the chamber, the villagers claimed they heard screams echo through the mountains. Days later, the thieves were found in the forest, dead, their faces twisted in terror, their skin blackened as though poisoned from within. No wounds, no weapons, only death. By the late 19th century, the practice of self-mummification was outlawed. The government declared it barbaric, an affront to life itself. Yet the relics remained. They could not be destroyed. To burn them was considered sacrilege. To bury them was feared to unleash their trapped spirits. So the temples kept them, silent and untouched, locked in glass coffins where visitors still bow to this day. Modern science has attempted to study them. X-rays confirm the bones remain intact, the organs shriveled but preserved. Microscopic analysis reveals the lacquer poison deep within their tissues, and yet none of this explains the stories. The shifting hands, the fogged glass, the whispered bells. One researcher described sitting before a relic for hours, waiting for nothing. But in the silence, he felt his heart slow, his breath weaken. He claimed he nearly fainted, as though the monk's body was pulling life out of him. He left shaken, his notes unfinished. His final line reads, "They are not dead, they are not alive, they are waiting." And perhaps that is the true horror. The monks who succeeded did not escape the world. They did not ascend to another plane. They became something in between, a body that will not rot, a presence that will not fade, a prayer that has no end. To sit before them is to be reminded that death is not absolute, that the body can defy the grave, but at a cost so severe it leaves behind not peace but unease. The relics do not smile with enlightenment. They smile with something else, something that suggests they know more than we should. And when the candlelight flickers against their faces, when the silence of the chamber presses too tightly, one cannot help but wonder, are they meditating in eternal stillness, or listening, patient, for the moment to rise? Today, centuries after the last monk attempted sokushimbutsu, their bodies remain seated in glass cases across northern Japan. Tourists arrive with cameras, scholars with notebooks, pilgrims with offerings. They expect artifacts of devotion. What they find instead are faces that still seem to watch. In one temple, the relic sits draped in saffron robes, his hands folded in eternal prayer. The glass case reflects candlelight, but visitors swear they see movement beyond the flame. Some claim the lips quiver as if whispering sutras. Others say the eyes, though sealed, twitch faintly beneath leathery lids. The monks who care for these relics speak carefully. Officially, they describe them as testaments of discipline, examples of faith taken to its highest sacrifice. But privately, their words tremble. They tell of nights when the chamber fills with the faint smell of lacquer, centuries old, of mornings when the robe appears disturbed, though the glass was locked tight. One monk admitted in secret that he sometimes avoids the relic entirely, unwilling to meet the withered face that seems to recognize him. Science has not eased the fear. Researchers who examine the relics confirm the body's preservation, the absence of fat, the lacquer embedded in tissue, the withered but intact organs. Yet every measurement, every photograph, every analysis fails to answer the deeper question. What are they now? The preserved monks are not skeletons. They are not corpses. They are bodies that refuse to decay, seated in meditation that has lasted centuries. The devotion that created them has outlived kingdoms, wars, and empires. To some, that makes them holy. To others, monstrous. Visitors bring offerings of rice, incense, and coins. They bow before the glass, but unease lingers in the silence. Some visitors refuse to stay long, whispering afterward that they felt drained, dizzy, as though the monk's presence pressed against their chest. Others report dreams following their visit, dreams of being trapped in narrow chambers, bells ringing faintly, earth pressing down. Even from afar, the relics draw fascination. Documentaries capture their withered faces, books describe their agonizing path, forums buzz with speculation. Yet behind the fascination lies a quiet terror. These monks chose their fate. They chose starvation, poison, burial. They chose to turn their bodies into prisons, and their choice succeeded. The relics remain, silent, watching, neither alive nor dead. A reminder that faith can reach beyond the grave, but not always toward salvation. To the faithful, the relic monks are proof of transcendence. They sit as evidence that devotion can conquer decay, that the flesh itself can be bent into eternity through sheer discipline. Pilgrims bow, believing the monks achieved Buddhahood, living Buddhas, still present in their withered forms. But to others they are not saints, they are prisoners. The poison that hardened their bodies may also have shackled their souls. Instead of rising into enlightenment, perhaps they remain trapped, bound to corpses that refuse to release them. What looks like serenity may be torment. What pilgrims call holy presence may be the faint echo of suffering that never ended. Some scholars argue the ritual was not only about faith but about power. A preserved monk elevated his temple, drawing pilgrims, donations, prestige. Monks who failed were forgotten, but those who succeeded became immortal symbols. Was it holiness or ambition disguised as devotion? Did these men die for enlightenment or for the glory of being remembered forever? And then there are the darker theories. Visitors who linger too long before the glass often report dizziness, faintness, or a sudden drop in body temperature. Some wake from nightmares of being buried alive, with bells ringing faintly in the dark. Psychologists call it suggestion. The monks call it proof that the relics still radiate power. But what if it is neither suggestion nor power? What if it is hunger? The relics are not dust. They are bodies that endure. Bodies that bleed no more, but which never gave themselves fully to death. And what does it mean when something is neither alive nor gone? Does it wait? Does it watch? Or does it reach subtly for the life of those who come too close? In some villages, the relic monks are still called guardians. Others whisper they are warnings. Proof that death can be delayed, but not without consequence. Proof that eternity is not bliss, but a cage. And so, each relic remains, centuries old, still seated in meditation. Their presence is undeniable. Their silence is suffocating. And their lesson is unclear. Did they achieve enlightenment, or did they create prisons of bone and prayer, binding themselves to a world they could never leave? He was a monk who entered his coffin alive. He starved, poisoned, prayed, and turned himself into something death could not touch. Centuries later, his body still sits upright. His lips are frozen in prayer. His skeleton is clothed in robes. And the bell that once rang from his chamber seems to echo still in the minds of those who look too long into his face. The ritual was supposed to be holiness, but holiness rarely looks this grim. These monks sought eternity through suffering, but eternity is not gentle. It left them seated in silence, locked in glass, their presence heavy as stone. Look at them now, skin clinging to bone, eyes sealed, hands folded. Are they saints or are they captives? Souls that should have risen but remain shackled by poison, hunger, and willpower too strong for death to break? Each relic is a contradiction. They inspire awe, yet they radiate unease. Pilgrims bow in reverence, but leave trembling. Monks dust their glass cases, but avoid their eyes. Scientists call them preserved bodies, but admit preservation alone cannot explain the aura that lingers. The monks wanted to escape decay, and they did. But in doing so, they escape nothing at all. They remain, not living, not gone, something in between. And that is the most disturbing truth. Death ends suffering, decay ends presence. But these monks chose to resist both. And in resisting, they may have trapped themselves forever, watching, waiting, listening in endless meditation. So the question returns to us. Did they conquer mortality, or did they lose themselves inside it? Did they become saints or skeletons chained to prayer? And if eternity is possible, is it a gift or a cage? Their bells have long since fallen silent, but the silence is heavier than sound. And when you stand before the relics, staring into faces that should have vanished centuries ago, the thought strikes like a whisper in the dark. What if they are still listening?